They wired the Kremlin, the secret submarine mission that tapped the Cold War. The cable was singing when the divers felt it, faint, metallic, alive. 400 feet down in the Sea of Okhotsk, a pair of gloved hands eased a metal pod around a Soviet lifeline. Inside that sheath, admirals spoke plainly, unencrypted, convinced the ocean made them invisible. Up above, a blacked-out submarine held its breath. The clamp clicked shut. Months later, a Soviet salvage ship hovered over the same spot. Cameras rolled. A pod rose dripping from the dark. In a cramped Maryland apartment, a red-haired ex-analyst counted cash. His payday had just lit a fuse that would burn an operation to the seabed. The dramatic question and the deal with the devil. Here's the puzzle we're chasing. How did a handful of divers, a modified submarine, and a stainless steel stethoscope turn the Soviet Pacific Fleet's private artery into an American open mic? And why did one man sell the map to the KGB? To grasp the stakes, go back to the boat that never wanted applause. USS Halibut moved like a rumor, slow, precise, rebuilt for deep work after its missile days were done. Her crew trained for blackout dives, saturation suits, and silence so complete you could hear your pulse in your teeth. Down the line, translators in windowless rooms would hear plain Russian from Petropavlovsk to Vladivostok. Patrol orders, maintenance gripes, readiness drills. No cipher, just voices. The ocean did the hiding, hubris did the rest. Meanwhile, onshore, a different pressure accumulated. Ronald Pelton, a former NSA analyst with debts and pride, knew the shape of secrets, where they lived, how they moved, which ones bought leverage even without paper. He could walk into an embassy with empty hands and a full memory. That's the deal with the devil at the heart of this story. Divers risking lungs and fingers in Soviet internal waters for information you can't fake, and a man willing to trade that same advantage for a stack of bills smaller than a used car loan. For years, the tap in the Sea of Okhotsk poured gold. Fleet schedules aligned with satellite wakes. American skippers adjusted routes with a confidence you can't teach. Analysts built profiles, acoustic signatures, command rhythms the human tells no machine can mask. Retrievals became ritual. Slide the pod, swap the reels, vanish the way you came. But every miracle tempts fate. One walk into the wrong door can turn a locked room into a crime scene. Pelton made that walk. A KGB officer heard enough to aim a searchlight at the seabed. Divers in different uniforms rolled film as they lifted an American secret into open air. Years later, a shaken KGB colonel would whisper just enough for the FBI to find the redhead who'd burned the well. So the dramatic question stands, was the win worth the burn? We'll follow the quiet heist, the windfall it created, and the betrayal that ended it, to see why the ocean mattered so much, and why one voice could close a hallway of steel. We need to go back to the sea the Soviets considered private. The Sea of Okhotsk, a locked room with a window. The Soviets didn't just chart the Sea of Okhotsk, they claimed it. On their maps, it wasn't an ocean, it was a courtyard. Walls thrown up by Kamchatka on one side, Siberia on the other, a frozen gate most of the year and a fog curtain the rest. Inside sat Petropavlovsk, the Pacific Fleet's heartbeat. From there, ballistic missile submarines slipped under the ice and into deterrence. If those boats could vanish at will, Moscow slept easier. If they couldn't, the whole balance shook. Geography did the heavy lifting. Shelves fell hard into deep basins. Sound bent in strange ways. Hydrophones seeded along the floor caught trespass before trespassers knew they'd been heard. Patrols looped predictable arcs because predictability felt like safety. Pilots flew lazy eights, frigates traced figure eights, and somewhere on a board in Vladivostok, an officer used words like internal waters with a certainty that sounded like law. But even courtyards need plumbing. Petropavlovsk had to talk to Vladivostok. Orders, parts, leave requests, weather, fuel, and the daily trivia that keeps a fleet from rusting in place. They moved faster by wire than by radio. So Copper found the seabed, took the shortest sensible path between nodes, and went to sleep under silt. Engineers buried it shallow where sediment was kind and slope was forgiving. Lawyers wrapped it in confidence. Encryption, sometimes, often not. When you believe the ocean is your safe, You don't count the combinations every morning. For American intelligence, that assumption was daylight. Satellites gave wakes and shadows. Radio gave whispers and caution. Human sources gave rumors. The missing thing was the pulse. Those words in copper flowed through a place no antenna could taste, no lens could fix. If you wanted that frequency, you had to go to it, quietly and with a plan that didn't end in handcuffs on a pier. The risk math was savage. Cross into internal waters, and you weren't trespassing. You were daring someone to make an incident. Put hands on a military cable, and you weren't collecting. You were betting crews' lives against a payoff you couldn't promise in a memo. But the payoff wasn't abstract. If that line carried sortie timings, patrol arcs, maintenance pains, and the little pauses that reveal real readiness, you could turn guessing into scheduling. You could move submarines and patrol aircraft like you knew tomorrow. Okhotsk invited arrogance and punished noise. That's why the American plan married patience to physics. First, draw the room. Cable layers aren't poets, they're practical. They favor shelf edges that won't slump and gradients that won't kink copper. Notices to mariners avoid anchoring over known routes. Maintenance ships idle where work lives. Fishermen swap stories about snagged gear in the same square year after year. Put those habits on a chart, and the big in Big C shrinks to a corridor. The Soviets' confidence reinforced the path. Patrols looped where they always looped. Surveillance boys heard what they always heard. The absence of change became a kind of cover. A submarine that could crawl on skids, settle to the bottom, and breathe as softly as silt could wait out the pattern and slide under it. The ocean would hide it with the same indifference it used to hide the cable. There was a human layer the maps didn't show. Divers trained to live at pressure, not commute to it. Crew drilled until silence wasn't just doctrine, it was etiquette. Topsiders learned to measure noise the way priests measure breath. The whole enterprise depended on a paradox. Break a boundary without breaking anything else. Don't cut. Don't spike a load. Don't leave fingerprints in a place that records everything except signatures. Inside Soviet offices, normal felt like protection. Officers briefed with coffee mugs in hand and grumbled about bearings. Duty chiefs repeated copy too fast when they didn't mean it. Those habits would matter later, but only if someone could hear them without announcing the act. The irony lived there, under the tea steam and the legal phrases. The safest room to speak in was the one that made you loudest to an ear pressed to the wall. So the American question narrowed. Could you turn a fortress into a window without the fortress noticing the draft? The answer wasn't in slogans. It was in bathymetry and cable-laying logic, in how ice forms pressure ridges and where sediment settles after storms, in how a captain decides his frigate has done enough loops for one night. A cable is just copper until you understand the people who use it. Then it becomes calendar, heartbeat, and leverage. In Okhotsk, leverage lived in straight lines disguised by distance. Petropavlovsk to Vladivostok isn't mythology, it's necessity. Somewhere along that necessity, buried shallow and ignored because it was supposed to be invisible, lay a chance. Find it, and you didn't just open a window. You took the frame off its hinges and set it back perfectly, so the room felt the same and the view changed forever. Designing the impossible, submarines, divers, and a box of secrets. To make a listening device breathe on the seabed, they had to unlearn what submarines were for. USS Halibut wasn't sleek anymore. She was a workshop with a keel. The missile bay became a garage for tools that didn't exist on any drawings, towfish that could smell current, sleds that could skim the bottom without raising a silt flag, anchors that paid out like a whisper instead of a clank. Noise discipline turned into a religion. Coffee mugs wrapped in tape. Wrenches cradled, not dropped. The boat was a bell jar with a heartbeat, and everyone learned to keep theirs quiet. The problem started with physics. Voices riding copper don't sound like anything unless you get close enough to feel the electric bleed. Microphones were useless. You needed coils tuned to the seep of current, a clamp that wrapped around a cable without breaking it, kissed the insulation gently, and drank the signal through induction. Engineers built that cuff like a jeweler builds a watch. No edges to echo, no bolt that could chatter. Every curve mattered, because at 400 feet, a millimeter of slop becomes a shout. Inside the clamp, a recorder waited. batteries that didn't mind the cold, tape that wouldn't warp under pressure. Power profiles shaved down until the thing could hibernate for months and wake up every time a battleship yeoman asked for bearings or a base commander pushed a drill across a calendar. The lab ran it through hell, salt fog, freeze-thaw cycles, pressure tanks that groaned, and then ran it again. If the pod failed, you didn't get a second try. You got questions and a funeral. The human half was harder. Saturation divers don't commute to work, they live there. Halibut carried a steel apartment inside her hull, living chambers, a transfer lock, a hot water plant to feed umbilicals, a med bay just big enough for a decision. Mixed gas replaced air. Decompression happened once, at the end. That's the only way to do long shifts without turning bones to chalk. Training took away comfort 1 sense at a time. Divers learned to count tools by touch, to feel the difference between cable sheath and silt with gloved fingers, to slow their breath when panic tried to hammer through a regulator. Doctrine read like superstition because superstition is just memory written short. Never cut, never surface, bag your trash, brush your footprints back into the seabed, fly the bottom on skids so thrusters don't write your name in mud, approach with the current so your scent goes where you've been, not where you're going. If a patrol plane shows early or a trawler lingers wrong, scrub. Pods can wait, lives can't. Everything pointed at the clamp. Clear the cable without shaving insulation. Cradle it so weight didn't bruise the armor. Swing the pod like a midwife's hands, not a mechanic's. Tighten in sequence so a fastener didn't translate into a shock on the line. Then test the bite. A faint rise in a meter topside. A ghost of syllables beginning to separate from current hiss. Above, tech slid a notch filter they'd argued about for weeks across the band. Carving away hums a cable shouldn't carry until the human band surfaced. Rough, smeared, unmistakable. Stealth extended past the pod. Camouflage had to read as geology to a bored Soviet camera, skins dusted with local grit, curves softened to barnacle logic. Latches were built for oven-mitt gloves, not bare fingers. Even the paint chemistry mattered. A bright scratch at depth is a flare. Divers rehearsed nestling the finished shape into a shallow scarp, reshaping silt by hand so no line shadow betrayed a recent touch. Before they left, they put back what they'd moved. Rocks weren't decorations, they were alibis. Topside, arguments never stopped. Early reels filled too quickly. Engineers squeezed months out of weeks with power discipline and better tape. Halibut's success begat Parch's purpose. Special mission boats arrived with bigger chambers, cleaner locks, anchor handling that sounded like prayer. The towed camera arrays learned to see without being noticed. Lower, slower, quieter, until the fish at the end of a cable could pass for a shadow that liked its job. None of it mattered if the ocean tattled, so the crew treated sound like light. A helmsman learned the difference between a rudder nudge and a whisper. A quartermaster measured anchor strain with 2 fingers on a frame. An engineer stroked a valve as if it could remember. That rhythm bled into the lock. The final checklist became a liturgy. Seals touched, tools named twice, umbilicals counted with a thumb on each braid. Panic was an intruder you barred with ritual. Then came work. The lock flooded. 2 figures dropped into dark that tasted like batteries and old coins. Lamps carved a coin-sized world. The cable lay where logic said it would, a shallow U in a gentle slope, growth soft, stubborn. A glove brushed until dull armor showed. A helmet pressed down to feel the low thrum of life. A single click on a throat mic told the boat what words would wreck. The clamps swung. Fasteners found home. Silence stretched thin as tape. And in a red-lit space inside a steel hull, a needle twitched. Human syllables rose out of noise. The recorder turned. No one cheered. Joy can be loud. When they left nothing. Silt brushed back. Pebbles returned to nests. A path unwalked. Back in the chamber, heat stabbed waking fingers like nettles. Someone made the same ugly joke he'd make every time. Someone else put a hand on a shoulder and squeezed once. The boat breathed again. The pod breathed below. And a box of secrets started filling because a handful of people had taught steel how to be kind. The first wire, finding and tapping the trunk. Navigation started in the dark, not just the water but the map. The sketch was a logic problem, Petropavlovsk to Vladivostok by the shortest sensible path, bent by bathymetry, and the tastes of Soviet cable layers who liked shelf edges and gentle slopes. Halibut settled onto her skids like a patient animal. Inside, breath came through teeth. Fingers stroked valves with 2 instead of 5. A towed fish paid out aft. A metal minnow tuned to the faint electromagnetic bleed a living cable throws when copper carries voices. They drew the seabed like detectives draw a room. First pass, silence, only the boat's own heartbeat. Second, a tickle that died with a swell. Third, a steadier rise as if a whisper cleared its throat. No one cheered. Ballast was trimmed. The hull breathed to let the sensor read water, not nerves. The squiggle held. A cursor blinked on a scope that only existed topside. Below, the lock began to fill. Cold, even warmed by hot water, finds knuckles first. The divers slid out, and the world shrank to an oval of lamp, and the tether's gentle tug that meant home. False promises lay everywhere. Lost nets, chain, junk that felt manufactured until a glove told on it. A hand hovered, then brushed, then pressed. Natural curves give. Man-made straightness resists. Under marine growth, a long shallow you lay in a scarp exactly where a practical cableman would have put it. The diver pressed his helmet to sheath and felt, more than heard, a low thrum. Life. One click on the throat mic. Topsides answered with a breath they didn't know they'd been holding. Procedure moved from memory to muscle. Clear a span without nicking insulation. Cradle the weight so stress didn't bruise armor. Swing the pod like a midwife's hands, not a mechanic's swing. The clamp's mouth opened like a book. Any book can dog ear if you rush. They didn't. Fasteners tightened in sequence so no talk translated into a sting on the line. A pause for silt to settle. A second talk. The cuff accepted its host. Up the umbilical, the recorder woke into noise. Current hiss, farm machinery, a ghost of the hull. The tech slid a notch filter he and a colleague had fought about for a month. The junk peeled away in layers. A shape surfaced, syllables smeared by copper but undeniably human. Then another voice higher, stepping on the first. A tape turned. Nobody smiled big. Joy can be loud. Hygiene mattered as much as attachment. The divers dusted back the growth like covering footprints in snow. They nestled the pod into a shallow fold, so a camera glance would call it geology. A tether brushed a stanchion on the way out and went taut. A hand went to a knife on reflex. The tender felt the snag song up the line and played slack through with a finesse you can't teach. Panic is loud. Patience is quiet. The lock clanged shut. Pressure climbed toward the chamber's routine brutality, and someone made the same ugly joke he always made. Heat stabbed pins and needles awake. A hand found a shoulder. That was the ceremony. Steel had learned to be kind. The pod had learned to listen. The boat remembered how to breathe. Days later, in a vault with fluorescent hums and a clock that no one trusted, the first reels spilled ordinary life. Bearings, paint, a tug's complaint. Then, like the first crisp line in a fog sketch, a patrol schedule. Hull names, departure windows. Aboard duty officers yawned between times. Analysts didn't clap. They set pencils down and looked at each other. The value wasn't drama, it was rhythm. Organizations betray themselves in repetition. The cable turned posture into appointment. Cross-checks hardened truth. A pier that went quiet on tape turned up empty in a satellite pass. A nickname for a cantankerous pump matched an acoustic hiccup the P3 crews had cursed for months. A Commodore's clipped vowels became mainline authority on a wall chart no outsider would ever see. In one room, a petty argument about a truck tire's delivery earned a yellow underline. Logistics hiccups ripple into sortie timing. In another, a translator wrote, "Throat clear equals bad news," next to a voice print she'd built from boredom. Risk shifted with the success. Retrievals moved from theory to calendar. The recorder's drumbeat, fill, swap, vanish. Set windows that fit inside Soviet patrol arcs the tape itself described. Procedures tightened. An anchor paid out one link earlier to avoid a new rattle someone thought they heard. A gloved hand shaved 2 seconds off a latch because 2 seconds multiplied by dives multiplied by months becomes noise fewer times. Word didn't broaden, it narrowed. Compartment doors closed like eyelids. The well stays sweet if only a few drink. Even inside, people spoke in code so bland it sounded like weather. And yet the effect outside those rooms was sharp. A submarine commander tracing a route through the Kurils felt, for the first time, like he wasn't guessing. He wasn't cheating. He was reading. That was the first wise gift. It turned a locked room into a window and taught the people in the dark how to see without being seen. Pillar IV, the Windfall, what the wire told America. It started small. A quartermaster in Petropavlovsk grumbling about bearings, a tug asking for a tow line. Then the rhythm thickened, duty rosters, maintenance windows, pier assignments, and buried among the trivia, the sentences that mattered, sortie timings, patrol boxes, readiness states. The cable carried the fleet's pulse in plain language, and the tape turned it into a metronome America could hear. In sealed rooms, analysts built pictures from voices. A Commodore's clipped vowels became mainline authority. A staff officer's habit of repeating key words flagged priority traffic. A logistics chief cleared his throat before bad news. Unencrypted language flattened delay. No ciphers to break. No keys to guess. Just the grammar of everyday work. Who asked whom, how urgency actually sounded when a sigh meant a deadline slipped. From those habits came a map. A Delta class due Thursday announced itself Monday with a spare SEAL's request. A Yankee skipped a maintenance day, and a watch chief joked he'd sleep under the reactor if parts didn't arrive. Jokes aren't jokes in analysis, they're arrows. Schedules lined up against overhead imagery, wakes matched orders. A pier that went quiet on tape showed up empty from space. Confidence didn't grow from a single perfect intercept. It grew from the rhythm across hundreds. Tactically, the water changed. American skippers threaded the Kurils with timing tuned to Soviet ASW rotations they'd heard, not guessed. A commander later admitted he felt like he'd been driving without headlights for a decade. The tap, he said, was like dawn. He never said it loud. You don't brag about light. P3 crews stopped carpeting basins with sonarbys. The cable taught them where the chase would begin before wheels left tarmac. Patrol aircraft slid into lanes on the clock, saving fuel, shrinking search boxes from counties to neighborhoods. ASW was always part skill, part patience. Now it was part appointment. Strategically, the Windfall reached further. Voices held doctrine made casual. How often commanders rehearsed quiet alerts. How logistics slowed when political leaders traveled. How training orders spiked after foreign port visits. You can read a force posture in how it complains. Readiness estimates that used to die on Fridays stayed alive through Sundays because the tape kept speaking in between. Briefers walked into rooms steadier. Negotiators did too. Knowing beats modeling when the stakes are nuclear. Encryption wasn't uniform. Whole stretches went naked, local loops and temporary circuits that never got temporary keys. When a scramble lamp lit on a Soviet desk, the tap heard line noise. But even noise had value. Timing is data. Who uses protection and when tells you where hurt lives. A burst of scramble at an odd hour warned of an exercise, or not an exercise at all. Compartmentation tightened. Very few saw raw tape. Fewer still saw timing married to hull numbers. Inside vaults, people spoke in code so bland it sounded like weather. A logistics officer walking past the wrong door would think the unit behind it handled maps. That wasn't paranoia. It was hydration. The well stays sweet if only a few drink. Translators wrote glossaries with human edges. Copy too fast meant no. Understood dragged meant trouble. A duty officer laughed before he lied. Pattern recognition drifted from signals into character studies. In war colleges, they teach order of battle like chess. On these reels, it sounded like office life. Messy, repetitive, revealing. Edges spilled outward. Acoustic libraries sharpened because schedules gave certainty. When you know exactly which hull leaves which pier on which tide, the engine's signature you record has a name. Passive arrays got smarter. Torpedo models fed better assumptions. Even satellite tasking refined. A glint on a pier means more when the cable said the pier would be empty 2 hours ago. Arms control briefers changed tone. They stopped selling estimates and started holding lines. Negotiating from hearing, not hoping, isn't swagger, it's posture. You don't gloat, you wait, you let silence work. None of it made the ocean safe. Storms still punched, mistakes still killed, but risk shifted from gambling to accounting. The cable didn't whisper secrets like a spy novel. It recited them like a ledger. America didn't just listen. It learned when to wait, when to move, and when to act like it knew nothing at all. That last lesson mattered most. The only victory that lasts is the one nobody can point at. The tape taught that, day after ordinary day. Scaling the trap, from one cable to a network. Success didn't shout, it whispered, and the whisper said, "Do it again." Once the first pod proved quiet and the reels came back humming with lives, the question inside vaults and wardrooms wasn't if they'd try again. It was how many times and where. Okhotsk had taught the grammar. Now came the sentences. Halibut showed the method. Parch turned it into muscle. Back at the yards, welders carved new spaces into old hulls, bigger saturation complexes, cleaner locks, anchor fairleads that paid out chain like a prayer. Noise discipline, already a creed, hardened into habit. A mug clink was a reprimand. A loose wrench was an omen. Boats evolved from hunters to surgeons. Arrive, settle, touch, and leave without a scar. The pod grew up too. Early cans held weeks. New barrels held seasons. Engineers shaved power until a recorder could winter over without begging for batteries. Camouflage matured from clever paint to skins dusted with local grit, molds whose edges read as geology to a bored Soviet camera. Latches accepted oven-mitt gloves. Fasteners tightened by feel alone. The goal stayed the same. Present as rock, remember as tape. The geography widened carefully. Okhotsk wasn't the only courtyard. North of Norway, the Barents tied fleet to Kremlin through lines the Soviets treated like law. In the Eastern Med, military trunks shadowed commercial routes along shelves no fisherman loved. No one used the phrase global network out loud. They spoke in targets and windows, but the logic repeated. Necessity draws copper the way gravity draws water. Follow what must be true. Scaling demanded a new religion, logistics. Retrieval cycles staggered so no two boats risked converging in the same box. Service windows tucked neatly inside Soviet patrol arcs the tape itself described. Ashore, spare pods were built in pairs, then fours, then eights, each tuned to a cable's peculiar impedance remembered from first bite. Divers drilled on scrap lengths that mimicked Soviet manufacture, armors that sprang back like stubborn wire, sheaths that fooled your palm until you learned their temperature through gloves. Seconds saved became noise avoided. Analysis scaled without flooding. New feeds didn't drown desks. They flowed through filters refined by the first wire. Voice biometrics got teeth because there were finally enough samples to teach machines what a throat clear meant in Kamchatka and a clipped copy meant in Vladivostok. Fusion cells stitched cable traffic to passes from space, to blips at the edge of towed arrays, to human fragments carried in from cold parking lots. A tug request on Tuesday in the Pacific could light a confidence score on a Thursday Barents estimate. Truth hardened at the joints. Risk rose invisibly. Every new ear was another chance for a Soviet diver's lamp to stick on a shape that didn't belong. The counter wasn't bravado, it was humility. Treat every site like it would be the first one found. Evidence hygiene bordered on compulsion. Divers carried mesh bags for the silt they disturbed, returned rocks to nests, brushed their own footprints out of mud. Topsiders audited what came back, flecks of barnacle, grains of grit. If the pod looked a shade too new, camouflage got another hour. Pride waited outside the hatch. Patterns learned at one site tuned choices at the next. A clamp profile that vanished at 400 feet in Okhotsk cast the wrong shadow at 200 in the Med. Redesign followed. A latch that sang in Barents swell got a felt sleeve. Even the way an anchor took strain became local. A quartermaster learned that a certain muddy bottom lied about holding. 2 more links went out, and the hull settled into a silence only that crew knew how to hear. Scaling wasn't just hardware, it was restraint. Scrub a run if the trawlers loitered wrong or a patrol plane's arc shifted by an hour. Pods could wait, luck doesn't. The network only grew if nothing about its growth showed. No heroics became a compliment in evals. With ears in multiple rooms, the music changed. A single wire gave local pulse. 3 produced syncopation. Headquarters shifted resources by tone before orders published. Commands mirrored readiness across regions like a flock banking in wind. Washington read posture instead of posture statements. Boats at sea took risk that looked reckless on paper, but was timed to Soviet boredom heard the week before on a different coast. Culture bent with the scale. Young officers learned that how you coil a tether could protect an edge bigger than your career. Divers realized they weren't just mechanics under pressure. They were editors, cutting commas into a novel the other side didn't know it was publishing. The highest compliment became the quietest. Looks like we were never there. And under it all lived the same rule that started in Okhotsk: proximity beats theory. The more you lived on the wire, the less you argued in rooms far from salt air. The network wasn't a trophy case. It was a discipline. Touch light. Leave clean. Come back if no one noticed you'd gone. The mole, Ronald Pelton, walks into the embassy. He didn't look like leverage. Red hair thinning, a suit that said overdue notices, the posture of a man who'd been explaining himself too long. January 14, 1980, he dialed the Soviet embassy in Washington twice. No name, just a promise. He knew secrets you couldn't photocopy. Hours later, Ronald William Pelton walked through a guarded door with empty hands and a full memory. He'd spent 14 years inside NSA, taught Russian by the Air Force, seasoned by the rhythms of other people's conversations. Not a field officer, not a thief of paper, an interpreter of systems, of how America heard. In 1979, his life unraveled: debts, divorce, a resignation signed under the weight of failure. He sold cars, tried insurance, watched the mailbox fill with red ink. Pride curdled into grievance. Desperation sharpened memory. The math started to look simple. What he knew could buy air. The first to meet him was Vitaly Yushchenko, a KGB duty officer whose job was to tell trash from treasure before dinner cooled. He asked for validation points no newspaper could provide. Office layouts, unit acronyms nobody used in public, the cadence of tasking inside a particular vault. Pelton spoke softly, like a man who'd practiced telling a story to himself. He described workflows instead of passwords, authorities instead of names, the logic that underwrote collection. Then he said a combination of words that changed the temperature in the room: Okhotsk, Petropavlovsk, Vladivostok, undersea cable, tap. Yushchenko didn't argue. His chair scraped back. He climbed a staircase too fast for a man used to careful steps and briefed his boss in sentences that didn't need adjectives. The thesis was simple. The Americans had put ears on a Soviet lifeline inside a sea Moscow treated like a fence. Tasking rewrote itself that hour. Not a manhunt, an autopsy with the patient still talking. For the KGB, Pelton was valuable precisely because he carried nothing. Paper can be old, process ages slower. He mapped the architecture of American listening the way a surveyor maps a farm: fences, wells, roads, not the names of cows. Over the next 5 years, handlers met him in restaurants where the forks were heavy, and in Vienna hotel rooms with curtains that didn't close right. They asked the same questions 12 ways. What should we fear? What are we missing? Where are the seams? Pelton answered in systems and habit, not code words. He got roughly $35,000 for it, less than a car, more than a month's rent, devastating in its return. Soviet countermeasures don't sprint, they tide. After Pelton's first visit, analysts reopened old weirdness. Trawler captains muttering about a US submarine with skids, maintenance crews noting a section of line that suddenly sounded clean, patrol patterns in the 1970s that made less sense the more you looked. A shape emerged, ordinary human logic painted over charts. In 1981, a salvage ship with an innocuous cover story anchored where no fisherman wasted time. Divers went down with orders to photograph anything the ocean didn't make. A pod rose dripping. The courtyard had a window. Back in Maryland, the reel went silent. Collection teams stared at dead air that said, without memo or meeting, that someone had found what shouldn't be found. A retrieval crew met absence. A cable that felt naked again. No shards, no message, just the clean space where a secret had lived. In Moscow, the device reportedly toured a basement museum, trophy and warning both. Encryptors tightened. Line crews checked routes they'd ignored for a decade. The lesson traveled faster than any speech. Pelton kept talking. When fragments arrived in Moscow from sources without context, he supplied the missing frame, cover names to workflows, brief labels to entire departments, how tasking moved like blood. KGB notebooks filled in tidy script. What he offered wasn't trivia, it was grammar. For them, a brain-like that was better than a safe. Then chance narrowed the circle. In August 1985, the same Vitaly Yushchenko slipped his handlers in Rome and walked into the CIA. Debriefers in a safe house poured coffee and caution. Across days, he unraveled cases like threads. One stuck. A red-haired former NSA man who'd walked into the Soviet embassy in January 1980 talked about undersea taps, described programs like a technician. No name, no need. The FBI had embassy phone intercepts from those nights, timestamps and call durations. Cross-checks began. Filter for ex-NSA, money, stress, physical description. The universe collapsed to one door. Agents built a perimeter around Pelton's life. Quiet surveillance, grocery runs, a car that needed tires. The tired gait of a man who'd learned to make himself small. They approached as if it were routine, a clearance follow-up, a background check. No accusations, just questions that nudged memory toward confession. The second interview sat in a wired room sensitive enough to catch a heartbeat between denials. Pressure wrecks neat stories. Pelton minimized. Then he named Ivy Bells. They staged a last insurance policy, an undercover meet in a hotel room, an agent wearing a Soviet face. The play wasn't for new secrets. It was for the man to recognize himself and talk. He did. On November 25, 1985, they arrested him on an Annapolis street. He didn't fight. He looked tired. In court, prosecutors didn't waive blueprints. They built their case on confession and what confession meant. Experts explained to a jury how revealing a method can erase years, how a lift ship in Okhotsk doesn't happen by luck. Pelton was convicted in December 1986. Espionage, conspiracy, unauthorized disclosure of communications intelligence. The sentence, 3 life terms plus 10 years. He served nearly 30 before parole. The ocean had hidden the pod. It couldn't hide the secret from a mouth. That's the human hinge in this story. Divers believed skill would buy anonymity. Analysts believed compartments could hold victory. One man, broke and bitter, disproved both with a phone call and a memory palace. The KGB's hunter, how they found the wire. The first clue wasn't a siren, it was a smudge. In Kamchatka, a line technician noted that a stubborn hiss along one span had gone strangely clean. Not perfect, just less dirty than yesterday. He wrote a margin note and moved on. Meanwhile, in Moscow, a different margin filled. After Pelton's walk-in, KGB officers reopened dusty folders and reread every oddity. Trawler crews muttering about a US submarine with feet. Maintenance logs flagging spots where anchors shouldn't snag, but did. Patrol reports that felt wrong in hindsight. Alone, each looked like noise. Together, they sounded like intent. Go look. The task didn't arrive with trumpet language. Naval headquarters issued an inspection order that read like routine. Survey a stretch for anchor fouling, validate route integrity, report anomalies. A salvage ship sailed east escorted just loudly enough to look like training. The divers got a different brief in the wardroom. Grid the suspected track, disturb nothing you don't have to, and film what your gut tells you doesn't belong. No one said American. They said foreign hardware. They shrank the search box with human math. Engineers drew the shortest sensible line between Petropavlovsk and relay nodes, bent by depth and slope. Cable layers are practical. They favor gentle shelves and forgiving sediment. Veteran skippers added gossip. Maintenance ships idled in one square too often. A ferry captain remembered boys he hadn't seen before. That's how the KGB hunts, not brilliant leaps, but patient stitches. Under a low lid of cloud, the ship anchored over a patch fishermen avoided. Divers sealed suits, checked lamp housings by feel, and dropped into a gray that swallowed scale. At 400 feet, light doesn't exist. You manufacture it. Their beam walked a trench. For 100 meters, only the familiar dull curve of a nation's artery half swaddled in silt. Then the lead diver's lamp flared on a shape the ocean doesn't make. It didn't advertise itself. No stencils, no serials, just a softened geometry, edges taught to hide, a color mixed to match mud, a rock that knew too much about corners. The diver circled once slow and found what anger needs, fasteners small enough to miss unless you're looking for a reason to be angry. He thumbed the camera trigger and let the lens linger on a seam that ran precisely parallel to the cable's axis. Nature doesn't do parallel like that. On deck, officers leaned over monitors. The image refused to say bomb, refused to say rock. Then the shot that decided it, that seam, crisp and unnatural, hugging copper like a cuff. No one said Americancy. They didn't need to. The order moved hand to hand in technical language. Prepare for lift. They went careful. No cut. No sudden strain that would send ripples up the line to men who measured ripples. Divers brushed sediment back with gloved care that mimicked the hands that had placed it. A sling eased under the form. Tension came in half-kilogram whispers. When the shape finally broke surface, dripping, the deck went quiet the way a church goes quiet when glass shatters in the nave. Cameras kept rolling because propaganda has doctrine. Film the theft so you can tell the story. But the footage didn't air. Senior officers realized spectacle was cheaper than study, and study mattered more. The pod vanished into a guarded crate. In a basement somewhere, technicians would strip it, diagram it, argue over choices the other side had made. Off the bow, sailors felt the change in their shoulders. The ocean had been dirty. Now it was clean. Onshore, the reaction wasn't a memo. It was a tightening. How long had it sat there? What else wore this camouflage? Encryptors hardened policy overnight. Anything unencrypted would be treated as if shouted through a window. Cable routes were audited, alignments rechecked, maintenance logs combed for shrugs that now looked like warnings. Fear got rank and walked with a purpose. Across the Pacific, a US boat slid into the service box and found absence where habit expected treasure. Retrieval crews ran checklists as if muscle memory could conjure a shape from silt. It couldn't. The cable felt naked again. No shard, no note, just a clean subtraction. In American vaults, the dead line lit dread. Analysts paged back through reels like mourners through albums, hearing ghost syllables where voices had lived. Commanders read silence as loudly as traffic. If Okhotsk had burned, other rooms might be warm. Compartment doors closed tighter. Briefers stopped using examples. Success measured in whispers had ended with a single clean lift and a lesson nobody wanted to learn out loud. The other side could learn too. The catch, Vitaly Yushchenko and the Pelton Takedown. Meanwhile, something else was moving in a different city, on a different clock. Rome, August 1985. A KGB colonel named Vitaly Yushchenko stepped away from his minders, walked into a quiet conversation with the CIA, and changed the angle of the light. He wasn't a clerk. He was a senior officer from the 1st Chief Directorate, Foreign Operations, fluent in cases Moscow guarded jealously. The defection felt like a windfall and a trap at once. Washington took him to a safe house and poured coffee carefully. Every fact he offered might save a source, or spring a mine the minute they believed him. Yushchenko didn't bring binders or code word lists. He brought memory drilled by repetition and fear. Debriefers asked for tapes and names. He gave them sequences, where meetings happened, how a handler phrased a question, which questions came only when a case mattered. Over days that bled into nights, a pattern emerged. Among the fragments was one that froze a room. A red-haired former NSA man who had walked into the Soviet embassy in January 1980 talked about US communications intelligence and described an operation that put American ears on a Soviet undersea cable. No name, no paper, just the outline that matched a wound. The FBI had their own memory, surveillance logs on embassy phones from that winter, time stamps, call durations, enough to seed a search. They cross-referenced Yushchenko's timeline with government rosters, filtered for ex-NSA employees in financial free fall, added a physical description, then let the database collapse the universe. It landed on Ronald Pelton. No dead drops, no microfilm, just a man whose mind had been the contraband. The Bureau built the perimeter quietly. Unmarked cars, notebooks that wrote down groceries, routes, the way he checked a mirror or didn't. They knocked gently, an interview framed as a routine follow-up on an old clearance. No accusations, Just a conversation designed to make memory choose between silence and relief. A second session followed in a room so wired it could hear a breath decide to become a word. Pressure reshaped stories. Pelton tried to minimize. Then he said the words that stitched years together. Ivy Bells. They still wanted insurance, so they staged a meet, an undercover agent posing as a Soviet contact in a hotel room that looked like any other bad carpet and heavy drapes. The point wasn't new secrets. It was confirmation that the man who'd walked into the embassy would walk toward the same gravity again. He did. 10 days later, November 25, 1985, agents took him on a street in Annapolis. No chase. Just cuffs, a rights warning, and the quiet intake of air people take when the long version of a story runs out. Back in Langley, Yushchenko delivered a second blow. He slipped out of a Georgetown restaurant and reappeared in Moscow, denouncing his months in American hands as drugging and kidnapping. The headlines looked like a punchline written by an enemy. The case didn't collapse. The damage was optical, not evidentiary. His early sessions had already given the FBI what they needed to lock Pelton's name to the wound in Okhotsk. In court the next year, prosecutors didn't roll a map into the room. They built a narrative out of confession and corroboration, what it means to reveal a method rather than a document, why a single disclosure can erase thousands of hours, how a Soviet salvage ship doesn't find a pod by miracle. Expert witnesses translated tradecraft into harm without crossing classification lines. The defense argued coercion and ambiguity. The jury listened to the rhythm, a walk-in, a dead line, a name said aloud, a sting. In December 1986, the verdict landed. Pelton was convicted on multiple counts and sentenced to 3 life terms plus 10 years. He served nearly 30 before parole. There's a quieter inventory that never goes in the record. The divers who risked fingers on cold metal had believed in invisibility earned, not granted. The analysts who built maps from breath had believed compartments could hold a win. The takedown taught both groups a rule nobody likes to frame. Steel can be quiet. Humans rarely are. The ocean hid the pod. The mouth unhid the story. And in a safe house in Rome, a colonel's memory gave the bureau the thread that pulled a decade tight. Collateral damage, Walker, codes, and the noise floor. While Okhotsk went dark, another breach was already unspooling through the fleet, this one in plain air. John Anthony Walker, a former Navy chief radioman with a taste for cash and control, was selling cryptographic keys and operating manuals to the Soviets from the mid-1960s into the 1980s. He didn't point them to a cable. He handed them the dictionary for everything that rode the ether. If Pelton told them where to listen, Walker told them how to understand what they heard everywhere else. Stakes arrived fast and personal. The US Navy's backbone, submarine broadcast channels, HF circuits, fleet command nets, relied on systems whose strength assumed key secrecy. Walker sold those keys. With them, KGB and GRU analysts didn't need Ivy Bells to learn schedules or tactics. They could strip meaning from radio traffic and make educated guesses where cable coverage didn't reach. It didn't kill the taps, it crowded them. Intelligence is an ecology. Introduce a second predator, and the prey's behavior warps. At sea, action looked like confusion. ASW squadrons that had cruised along clockwork started returning with stories that soured the coffee. Soviet boats appeared in boxes they shouldn't have known, surface units, coincidentally arrived when US subs transited choke points. Captains tightened everything, routes, margins, signatures. Silence, always a weapon, became armor too. In analysis cells, cross-checks that had sung in tune now buzzed with dissonance. Was that Soviet move a read of broken codes, a trace of Pelton's map maturing, or a patrol pattern that just got lucky? The noise floor rose. Impact rippled into doctrine. Counterintelligence briefers rewrote slides. The new rule wasn't we lost a source. It was assume multiple compromises. Rekeying bled across fleets. Crypto gear queued for swaps. Authentication drills burned into muscle. Training paused mid-cycle while comms officers taught sailors to murder habits the Soviets had been reading like a newspaper. The fix cost more than pride. It cost tempo. Ships lingered pier side, waiting for new fill. Aircrews learned to count seconds between syllables like they were measuring detonators. Inside vaults, the ghost of Ivy Bell still shaped how people thought: patient fusion, timing discipline, respect for the enemy's bureaucracy. Walker forced a second habit: distrust your own certainty. Analysts began scoring confidence as aggressively as content. Where did this come from? Moved from footnote to first line. Provenance became survival. A crisp intercept wasn't gold by itself. It needed a chain of custody. Intel chiefs called that tradecraft. Operators called it not dying. Culture hardened. Sub-crews adopted new brevity and stricter emissions control. A routine buoy drop started to feel like shouting coordinates. A scrape in the bilge sounded like a shadowing trawler. The folk wisdom sharpened: never be where your paperwork says you are. Meanwhile, comms teams treated filler chatter like uranium. Walker had given the Soviets the shape of American voices, their weights, their rhythms. Mimicry became a weapon, paranoia, adaptation. The ecology cut both ways. Walker's keys made Pelton's hints more dangerous. Pelton's map made Walker's keys more valuable. KGB case officers no longer had to guess which nets mattered. Decrypted traffic pointed to priority circuits. Analytical threads led them to seabed miracles. Decision time compressed on the American side. If a Soviet ship loitered near a suspected tap site, was it accident, cable sweeps finally ordered, or a vector from broken crypto? Ambiguity drove risk tolerance to the floor. Audits turned ruthless. Security teams matched access logs to lifestyles. Debt waved red flags as loud as attitude. Polygraphs multiplied. Background checks deepened until sailors joked only monks could pass. The kind of gallows humor you use to get through a day when you don't trust your locks. The Stilwell Commission's warnings about insider threat, still fresh, became scripture. The message was simple: the softest target is sometimes a colleague. Strategy shifted definitions of victory. Before, it was, we heard them. After Pelton and Walker, it became, we can hear them, and they can't hear that we heard. That second clause demanded humility. Burn a source you love to save one you need. Trade a tap for a timing edge. Accept that silence about your silence is the only sustainable win. In the end, Walker didn't just hand Moscow keys, he handed Washington a mirror. It showed how brittle triumphs become when they live in a single channel, a single habit, a single human. The fix wasn't louder collection, it was colder discipline. Keep your touch light, your exits clean, and your confidence provisional. Only then does signal rise back above the noise. The doctrine shift from wires to the web. What Ivy Bells really proved wasn't just that you could steal a conversation. It proved proximity beats theory. You can model an adversary forever, or you can sit inside their system and let routine tell on itself. That lesson didn't stay on the seabed. It climbed the pier, walked into lab buildings, and rewrote how America thought about signals, access, and what collection should look like. Inside the community, the old divide, stand back and listen versus get close and touch, tilted hard toward the latter. If a cuff could ride a trunk and survive, you didn't need to chase broadcasts. You could live on the wire. Engineers began designing for residents. Devices that blended with infrastructure, firmware that whispered instead of sang, power profiles shaved until presence looked like background radiation. The seabed tap became a template. Don't break the service, and your presence is persistence. Institutions shifted around that reality. Compartments that had protected Ivy Bells moved from exceptional to standard. Access lists shrank from need to know to need to do. Auditors started asking, show me why you touch this, instead of tell me what you know. Counterintelligence stopped being a quarterly lecture and became an ecosystem. Quiet flags on people whose lives started to rhyme with pressure, travel patterns that no longer made sense, finances that did the wrong math. Pelton and Walker had made sure of that. Doctrine paired daring with distrust in equal measure. The lineage ran straight through technology. Copper became glass, but an optical core is still a core. Repeaters along an ocean span still need power, housings, maintenance intervals. If a device could hug coax without killing it, a device could sit near a repeater and do math on light. It didn't require Hollywood. It required patience, a hull with room for tools, and cover good enough to explain why a ship loitered where nobody anchored. That's where special mission boats earn their budgets, platforms built to deploy, retrieve, and disappear. Think Parch after Halibut. Later, a boat with a curious hull extension left port without fanfare and came home the same way. On land, the attitude scaled. The web wasn't metaphor anymore, it was terrain. Where Ivy Bells had read command rhythms in plain Russian, new teams read authentication rituals in packet flows. You didn't need to break the cipher if you could live upstream of the key exchange or inside the box that thought it was alone. Supply chains became routes, firmware became coastline. Tailored access, quiet implants, persistence over spectacle. A saturation diver would have recognized the ethos. Get close, don't be seen, leave the lights on. Policy followed in fits. After Burns, Okhotsk gone, crypto compromised, leaders learned how triumph turns brittle. Joint units grew around the idea that offense and defense share roots. A crew that knows how to ride a wire is better at spotting when someone rides yours. Oversight gained teeth. Lawyers who'd once blessed a mission on a handshake began asking about lifetime exposure, escalation ladders, and the day a journalist calls with the wrong question at the worst time. Budgets matured in parallel. Programs you'll never see paid for a productive contradiction. Keep building ways to live inside foreign systems while investing to make sure no foreign service lives inside ours. That mirror wasn't academic. The Soviets learned it in a lift ship's shadow. The United States learned it as fiber knit the planet tighter and vulnerability traveled at light speed. Culture changed tone. Underwater teams still trained, still locked out into cold that stole fingers before memory. But the law now included keyboard crews tracing paths through routers like divers through kelp, gloving their presence in timing quirks. One group wore neoprene, the other wore hoodies. Both believed the same sentence: if they don't notice, we get to come back. The doctrinal core hardened into 3 habits. First, proximity over prediction. Sit where decisions move, then measure, don't guess. Second, residence over raids. Presence that becomes part of the background beats a smash and grab. Third, humility. Treat every source as seasonal. Rehearse the day it dies. Fusion built like a redundant grid, never a single glowing line on a map. Secrecy stayed heavy. Books claimed too much, films invented. The record that matters remained redacted and probably should. But you could see the doctrine's silhouette in modern crises. A rival's network flickers before a negotiation, a curious hull extension slips to sea without press, a briefing delivered in calm nouns allergic to adjectives. It was the same lesson, written in a new alphabet. Make your touch quiet, your exit cleaner, and your confidence provisional. Proximity wins. Persistence keeps it. The human cost, divers, crews, and the silent burden. Ask the divers what's stuck, and they won't say triumph. They'll tell you about taste, warm metallic water fed through suit lines, rubber in the mouthpiece, the copper tang that fear leaves behind your teeth. They'll describe the smell of hydraulic oil, the way your own breath counts down inside your helmet. They lived at pressure for weeks in steel cylinders, decompression curves taped above bunks like scripture. When the lock flooded, jokes died. Gloves checked seals by feel. Tool names were spoken twice. Someone, always the same someone, tapped the pod latch rhythm on the bulkhead, then swore he never did. Underwater, pride learned to whisper. A diver's world shrank to lamp glow and the tether's hand on shoulder tug that meant home. Fingers numb, they worked a ritual brush, cradle, swing, tighten, slow enough to choke panic, fast enough to beat cold. Entanglement wasn't theory. It was a line brushing your calf, and that rising breath the tender could hear in his headset. The answer was muscle drilled. Exhale, pause, hand over hand, trust the voice topside not to lie. Back in the chamber, heat stabbed feeling into hands so sharply a man could weep and call it salt. Up in steel, another pressure held. Boats learned to hold their breath. Sailors padded in socks, mugs cradled so ceramic never clicked. A quartermaster read the hull by fingertips on a frame, feeling anchor strain like pulse. The engine room ran like a chapel, no chit-chat, valves stroked like secrets. Helmsmen remember the coffee, stronger, quieter, respect poured into cups because no one wanted a rattle to travel. Doctrine never wrote that down. Crews did anyway. One clink could equal one curious aircraft. Silence had a sound. When divers were overdue by 5 minutes, someone cracked a knuckle and pretended he wasn't counting. Orders shaved to bone. Hold. No. Again. Because extra syllables felt like risk. The ritual after the lock clanged shut never changed. One ugly joke to break the air, a hand on a shoulder, and a pot of stew shoved into cold hands. Nobody said thanks. Everybody knew. The weight didn't stay at sea. At home, families learned the look that drifted mid-sentence, the shower that ran too hot, too long, the fork hovering like a glove seeking a latch. Spouses kept calendars with blank spaces where cruises should be, told children gentle lies about ocean science, folded laundry around medals that didn't say what for. Decades later, a diver froze in a grocery aisle because a refrigerator case hummed like a cable in the dark. In sealed rooms ashore, analysts carried a different cost. They knew voices by nickname, the Commodore with the cough, the logistics chief who said copy too fast. They built maps out of breath and watched a line die in 1981. Grief isn't a word they claim. But the day the reels went blank, someone in a vault raised a paper cup and said nothing for a long minute. After Pelton, they learned a lonelier skill, holding victories they couldn't share and losses they couldn't mourn. Recognition came sideways. A quiet citation in a ceremony nobody filmed, a handshake from a flag officer who never said Okhotsk, a presidential unit citation tucked behind tax forms. Men who had brushed silt from a Soviet artery went back to mowing lawns, coaching softball, waking at 3 because a dream jammed a latch. They weren't poster heroes. They were technicians of risk, craftsmen of patience, custodians of a secret that kept submariners alive who never learned their names. The cost wasn't just cold, pressure, and the math of decompression. It was swallowing the story for a lifetime, living with the knowledge that the best work you ever did had to live behind your teeth. Ask what it gave back and they'll shrug. Press, and one will say very softly, "We made it work. We made it home." Then he'll leave the rest unsaid, because the ocean remembers, and so do the people who learn to be quiet inside it. Pillar XII, the perfect trap or a perfect temptation. From the moment the first cuff closed clean and the reels came back breathing, the idea felt invincible, not loud, not boastful, just certain in the way a habit feels after it proves itself. Wrap the nerve, don't break the skin, come back when you need more. That certainty sharpened procedures, shaved noise, taught hands to be gentle. It also planted a risk nobody wanted to name. A perfect trap tempts you to stare at the prey and forget the hunter can change. Here's the question that sat between coffee cups after the line went dead. If Pelton never picked up a phone, how long until the Soviets stumbled onto the cuff anyway? Maybe a fishing captain's snag. Maybe a maintenance officer with a suspicious ear. Maybe a training film that told divers to look for unnatural shapes, and meant it this time. The operation assumed the ocean could hide a secret forever if humans behaved, but humans don't. They inspect, they replace, they drift off checklist and correct hard the day after. Success bends judgment. Inside vaults, traffic began to feel like gravity. Why argue a schedule when the wire would confirm it by noon? Why risk a human source when the cable already named hulls and tides? The trap's beauty was leverage. The temptation was doctrine built on ears, not uncertainty. That's not arrogance, it's inertia. When a story reads clean for too long, imagination atrophies. You stop inventing other endings. Counterfactuals don't rewrite history, but they uncurl posture. If the tap had lived 5 more years, would the habit of listening have dulled other senses? A savvy adversary could have left trivia on copper and shifted hard orders to different circuits. Burst radio, couriers, or encryption finally prioritized out of embarrassment. Worse, they could have salted the line with truths that trained you to swallow a lie when it mattered. A perfect source makes a perfect channel for deception if you forget the author knows you're reading. There was another discomfort. The cable steadied hands in rooms above the waterline, arms control briefers whose calm came from voices they couldn't cite, planners whose confidence in crisis drew strength from a diary under the sea. The tap sat quiet while handshakes happened in front of flags. That isn't conspiracy, that's gravity. Real understanding shrinks bluff. But when the pod was lifted, confidence evaporated faster than doctrine could adjust. Leaders still talked like they knew, but but they couldn't prove. Drafts blew through those rooms. Humility arrived late, but it arrived. After Pelton, after Walker, after a retrieval crew found absence where habit said treasure, a new culture learned to rehearse loss. Build fusion like a redundant grid, not a single glowing line. Score confidence as hard as content. Treat every source as seasonal. Train the day it dies so your picture doesn't. That wasn't defeatism. It was respect for an enemy that learns in public what you learned in secret. On boats and in basements, the lesson landed simpler. If you think a clamp makes you untouchable, you rush. If you believe a cable will always whisper the same way, you stop brushing silt like it matters. If your analysis rests on voices that never expected an audience, you forget that scripts change when the stage lights move. So, was the win worth the burn? Ask a diver with scar tissue where circulation never came back right. Ask an analyst who can still recite a Commodore's throat clear and misses it like a friend. Most will say yes and mean it. Lives at sea were spared, decisions ashore steadied. That matters in the moment it matters. The cost isn't a warning against daring. It's a guardrail against falling in love. A perfect trap isn't a destination. It's a season. You harvest while it's ripe and leave the field clean. You keep your touch light, your exit cleaner, your judgment provisional. You stop believing the ocean loves you back. And you listen hardest for the moment the world stops sounding like it did yesterday. The legacy in today's oceans. The ocean didn't keep the secret, it kept the lesson. What Ivy Bells taught, get close, live quietly inside the system, and leave no fingerprints, migrated from copper to glass and from divers to code. Today, the seabed is crowded with arteries that carry almost everything: finance, diplomacy, gossip, fear. Fiber optic cables tie continents tighter than treaties. You don't need to crater a port to cripple a nation. You can touch a strand of light 1,000 meters down. Modern fleets treat cables like sovereign terrain. Patrol lines now trace routes along charts that once only cable layers cared about. Unmanned vehicles drift and crawl where divers once swam. UUVs mapping trench and fault, parsing seabed topography for the telltales of a splice, a repeater, a vulnerability. Platforms changed, posture didn't. A special mission submarine leaves port with a strange hull extension and no fanfare, built for work that isn't photographed. Across the map, another boat carries submersibles with claws and lights that don't mind the dark. Both sides say they're doing research. Neither side believes it. The public conversation stays a step behind the waterline. Governments warn about critical undersea infrastructure, with phrases polished until nothing sharp remains. Insurers adjust rates. Fishing skippers get new notices about restricted survey zones. And when a cable goes dark between two quiet shores at 2 a.m., telecoms blame geology while admirals circle dates on a wall calendar. That quiet is performative. Everyone understands the stakes. No one wants to narrate them in real time. Cyber and seabed blurred into one continuum. A firmware implant on a shore station can be as potent as a pod on a span. A tailored packet stroke can teach a repeater to blink the wrong way, harmless for years, decisive on a chosen morning. The ethos is the same as Okhotsk: persist without harming service, learn traffic flows, read habits, and practice patience. The difference is speed. A mission that took weeks underwater can be a few lines of code and a couriered drive, if you've already placed your hands in the right supply chain. Allies built doctrine around resilience because offense is cheap and silence is expensive. NATO drills now include cable cut scenarios the way last centuries did convoy defense. Norway, Britain, France, and the US field mixed patrols. Frigates above, UUVs and towed arrays below, watching not for fleets, but for small presences doing careful work. The choke points of submarine warfare now overlay the choke points of data. Luzon Strait, Sicily Channel, North Sea landfalls. Geography found a way to matter again. Law trails reality. Conventions speak in generalities, while flag states argue over whose seabed is whose past 200 nautical miles. Attribution does the heavy lifting that proof can't, and sanctions substitute for evidence. That grey helps the quiet professionals. It also invites miscalculation. Ivy Bell's cleanest lesson still applies. Escalation starts when the other side can point. Keep them from pointing. there's a human echo. The divers who brushed silt now teach engineers who brush firmware, and their advice lands the same. Slow hands, clean exits, no swagger. A generation raised on satellites learned to love bathymetry again. Cable route surveys look like reconnaissance. Reconnaissance looks like deterrence. Deterrence looks like a ship loitering too long near a spur that moves trillions a day. Everyone sees the loiter. Few see the intent. Continuity may be the truest part. Proximity still beats theory. Access still rewrites analysis. The adversary still learns. If you listen too long in one place, you build doctrine around a voice that can change inflection without warning. So modern programs braid sources, seabed, space, human, math, and live with the discomfort of never trusting any single feed. The ocean remembers, the networks remember, and the people who work inside both take their pay in patience, precision, and the right to walk away unseen. The line that was crossed and kept. They crossed a line on the seabed and turned an enemy's nerve into an unguarded hallway. Then a single voice sold the map, and the hallway closed. The real legacy isn't the wire, it's the habit. Get close, stay quiet, and never fall in love with a source. 1971, Halibut hunts. 1972, the cable sings. 1980, Pelton walks in. 1981, the pod rises. 1985, Yurchenko whispers. 1986, Pelton falls. If you want more untold operations shaping today's standoffs, from seabed games to silent intrusions, watch the next film and subscribe. The next tab. The mission that made missiles miss, until another insider flipped the table. A cable, a codebook, a single phone call. That story's next. Don't blink.